So that should now be recording, and over to you, Helen.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you for our first session this evening. So we're going to be talking about understanding roles, responsibilities and relationships in education and training. So what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to talk through each of the points. So we've got 1.2, 3 and 4, then moving on to section 2 and section 3. And I'll talk about each of those standards. And then at the end, we'll talk about the assessment and what we need to do for that. So if we go to the next screen, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk through the teacher standards, because that is really what underpins everything in teaching and what we work towards, and also what we're judged upon as well. And then when you start to do your teacher training, you'll see that this is what you'll start to work towards. These will be your objectives, and across your training time, this is what you'll be judged on and working towards. So as you can see, in the first part there, we've got about the teaching. So it's about setting high expectations, which inspire, motivate and challenge pupils. And that's obviously key, having high expectations of your children in your class, whether that be for learning, whether that be for behaviour, whether that be just walking around the classroom, how they speak to one another. We have to set those high expectations. And very often I hear teachers say in that first half of term, oh, it's so hard in September trying to get the children together. But it really is important that straight away, as soon as you get your class, you set those high expectations, and then you are consistent in maintaining those expectations, because I'm telling you, as the year goes on, you will relish the fact that you were hard in that first half term. And when you come to, this is the problem you see, by the time you get to July, you've molded your children, you've got your class sorted, and then you have to pass them on to the next teacher and the next lot come through. So that's why teachers are always moaning in September about how hard it is, because we forget all of the hard work that we've put in. Then, of course, it's about promoting good progress. And fundamentally, that is what we are there for in the classroom, to make sure that our children make progress. Now, it's being aware of their capabilities. It's building in on our prior knowledge. It's about us understanding where our children have got to get to next. And it's thinking about those barriers for learning with our children and how we can move those children on, making sure that we're addressing those individual needs and making sure that we're coming across the barriers for learning that our children have. Now, this is the section that does worry a lot of new teachers. It's about the subject knowledge, especially in primary school. I'm just gonna put that out there. Sorry, Laura, I know you're secondary, but for primary, because we're having to teach all the subjects across the day. And 1 minute I'm teaching math, then I'm teaching RE, then I'm outside doing PE, then I might be doing science. And so it does worry teachers when they first start with primary school about having that subject knowledge. And there's no getting away from it. You do have to learn on the job, putting in those extra hours, bit of extra homework. But as you progress through, you start to understand where children have come from lower down the school, where they need to get to for year 6, and then transitioning on into secondary school, and it just comes. So there's nothing to fear about that. Although I have to say, come September, my times tables knowledge is a little rusty, whereas in July I am on top form. But yeah, so it's just thinking about what those children need to know in your lesson to be able to make progress, what they knew before, what they need to know in that lesson, and where they need to go next. And obviously, to do that, we need to plan and teach well-structured lessons. As I've said, it's building on. It's all layers in teaching. In the subject knowledge, it's layers, building on and developing that understanding. And we all need to know where they've got to get to and where they've come from. And I'm going to keep saying that, because it's fundamental to know that the progression that the child makes throughout their time in education. But we need to make sure that we are planning those lessons so that they are coherent. So there's no point us teaching the last thing if we haven't taught the first thing. And also, it's just because it's on the plan doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do it. Children love going off at a tangent. I love going off at a tangent, but bringing them back. But also, if they haven't got something, just keep going over it until they have. Don't move on. Otherwise, they haven't got those foundations to build those on. And then we've got to adapting to the strengths and needs of the pupils. Now, shock, Not all children learn at the same pace. Not all children will be at the same standard. I've got children in my class. I teach year 6 currently. I've got children who are at year 2 level. I've got children who are exceeding year 6 and everything in between. But it's knowing your class. It's knowing the children in your class and what they need. Do they need resources? Do they need a slightly different task? Do they need a completely different task? Do they need someone just to check in with them and make sure, do you understand what you're doing? Lovely. Right, now move on. It's knowing your children and responding to them so that they are able to work independently in your class, not having to rely on an adult to get them through that lesson, having that task or those resources which will allow them to work independently, because then they will have the confidence and they will flourish and they will be motivated and enthused and want to carry on. So then our next section, section 6, we've got accurate and productive use of assessment. And that's not just tests. That is teachers, adults wandering around the classroom. Oh, I can see you haven't got that one quite right. Let me just model something for you here to get you back on the right track. Oh, you don't. Oh, actually, I'm not sure the whole class have quite understood this. Let's stop. Let's have a mini plenary. Let's chat through what we're doing. Oh, you've got a good idea. Oh, would you like to model what to do? I'm just going to model what to do. The new approach that's coming in at the moment, and it's, well, I say it's new, it's been around for ages, but you know, everything goes in a circle in education. It's the I do, so the teacher models. Then it's the we do, let's all have a go together, and that might be using whiteboards. And then it's you do, children, and you're going to do that independently. But we can't do any of that if we don't have the assessment. But likewise, there is also formal assessments that, you know, we can't get away from. That is part of our education system. So there is that, but making sure that we use that properly. You don't just mark them, stick them in a cupboard and forget about them. It's what gaps did we have in our knowledge, and so we can address those in subsequent lessons. But none of this will happen if we don't manage the behaviour effectively in our classrooms. If our children don't feel safe in our classrooms, they won't learn. And so we have to make sure that we master that behaviour management, making sure that children do feel safe, making sure that we have as least disruptions as possible in our classrooms. And so that is managing the behaviour effectively. And you're not alone on that. The school should have a really good behaviour policy with all the steps laid out so that you know what to follow, you know what to do. And a behaviour across the school is something that is collective. You're not on your own in your classroom managing the behaviour. It's a collective. But as I'll say again, if your behaviour management isn't correct in your classroom, everything else we've just spoken about will fall by the wayside and children won't be able to learn. Now, as a teacher, we do have wider professional responsibilities. Now, that could be running a club. That could be running a subject. There's all sorts of things that come under this, but it's also using any other adults that you've got in your classroom effectively. It's not about that extra adult sitting gazing at you thinking, oh, you're an amazing teacher, I'm learning so much. That extra adult in your class, you are really lucky to have them, because the way budgets are in schools at the moment, they're like gold dust. So when you have an extra adult in your classroom, make sure that they are active in supporting the learners in your classroom. Have to make sure, right, they're your eyes and ears as well. Don't think that table over there's got that. Perhaps we could just give them a little extra support. I'm just going to go and work with these children over here, just pop them back on the right track. So it's making sure that everybody in that classroom is working to make sure that those learners make progress. And under this role, it's about parents as well. We have to work together collectively. If children realise that you're going to give those parents the messages as well, that actually we're working together as a team, and then the child will flourish and make progress. Now, the downside of being a teacher is that you are a teacher 24/7. Whether you're at the pub, whether you're in the park with your children, whether you're on social media, and when you're in your classroom, you have to maintain professional conduct. You don't know who's watching you or where they see you, whether you're in the alcohol aisle in Tesco's. Everybody sees you everywhere. And so you have to make sure that you are maintaining professional conduct and modeling good behavior at all times. And that might seem like a really big responsibility, but if we want our children in our classrooms to grow into wonderful adults and to flourish and to have high expectations for themselves, then we are the role models. I'm sure you can think back to times when you were at school and there's a teacher that sticks in your mind, someone who said something to you that maybe that's why you're where you are today. Teachers play a fundamental role in children's lives, in young adults' lives. Do not underestimate the power that you will have, the influence that you will have in your student's life. Okay, so that is 1.1. That is explaining about the teaching role and responsibilities that we have. So now we're going to move on to looking at legislation. And I've put some links on here. I'm just going to give you a brief summary of each one, but actually my advice to you is to click on those links and to read through each of these documents, because actually that gives you the heads up, because when you go into schools, they'll ask you to read these documents. So if you're already saying, oh, I know about safeguarding, I know about data protection, I know about the Equalities Act, it will look good. So safeguarding. Safeguarding is fundamental and it is everybody's responsibility in the school. It is not just you as the teacher, it is absolutely everybody, site manager, cleaner, lunchtime supervisor, head teacher. It is everybody's responsibility to look after the welfare of the children in that school. So this particular document is what keeping children safe in education. It's updated regularly. Teachers receive training on it yearly. And the training also comes in if there's any updates that are put into it. Safeguarding fundamentally is where you are looking after the children that are in your care. And this document sets out all the different types of behaviours that you should be looking out for and what to do if you notice that a change in behaviour. And you as the teacher see these children more than probably anybody, because you're seeing them all day long and you're seeing how they interact with other children, and you'll be able to notice if there's any changes. So safeguarding is absolutely paramount. The next document I've given you the link to is the Health and Safety at Work Act. Now, you might be thinking, oh, that's nothing to do with teaching. Well, actually it is, because teachers do love to climb on a table to put up a display, or they might balance on a chair when they're hanging things from a washing line. So it is fundamental that you're looking after yourself and the people in your workplace, and that your employer is looking after your health and your health and well-being as well. So that is some legislation there that I recommend that you have a look at. Next, we have the Equalities Act, and this act is in there to protect you and against discrimination, whether that be age, disability, gender reassignment, race, religion, sexual orientation, pregnancy and maternity as well. That's all covered in the Equalities Act. So nobody should be discriminated for having any of those characteristics. And so that's what that act does. Make sure that we're all it's all fair and we're all protected and we're not discriminated against. So I suggest you have a read of that as well. Next, we have the data protection. We do need to have an awareness of this in schools, because there's children's names written all over anything. Let me put a scenario to you. So, for example, you might have a child in your school who's on the child protection register, and there's a parent that mustn't know where that child is. So if all of a sudden we're showing documents with their names on, we're putting pictures of them on the internet, then we are in breach of GDPR. So we need to be very mindful of this. Even coming down to, I've done some tests recently, they wrote their names on the front page, and so I had to shred all of the front pages, and then I could just throw away the rest, recycle the rest of the paper. But we do have to be very mindful of data that is put out, where we're putting it, especially names and surnames, whether we're publishing that around the school. Just need to be very mindful of that. So have a read of that document, and that'll give you the heads up about that.
Even down to the books, though, isn't it, Helen? I know the data protection manager at my last school, so there'll be someone designated in charge of that. And they saw me putting some old books that students hadn't claimed in the bins, and she said, "Oh my goodness, stop!" And I was like, "No, we've redacted all of their names." So we'd gone through with a pen and redacted all of the names, and any that kind of showed through, we ripped up, and those bits were shredded. But she told me about a story of a teacher who dumped all of their old books without doing that, and then that teacher had to go skip diving to fish out all of the books.
So save yourself the shame of having to skip dive. It's just being mindful of where you're putting names of children and other members of staff, because you just don't know what the backstory is. So just being very careful of that.
And that's electronically as well as like on paper, isn't it, as well?
You know, if you were to send an email to a colleague about a child, you would have to use their initials. You can't put their full name into the email. Just can't, you know.
Yeah.
Also need to be mindful of the Freedom of Information Act. So anything that would have a person's name in, if someone wanted to, you know, recall everything that had been written about them, then, you know, you need to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah.
So next, Laura, now this is just to give you an idea. I copied and pasted this screen from my own school computer about the number of policies that you will face in a school. Now, obviously, some are more important than others, like the pay policy, for example. That's very important, as is something like the grievance policy or the capability policy. Hopefully, we'll never come across those, or the disciplinary policy. But there are other ones in there too, like the mental health. We've got a menopause policy, the SEN policy. So in schools, you will find that there is a policy for pretty much everything. And so it's, well, I'm not saying by any means, you know, when you go into school that you need to read all of those policies. You will be pointed in the direction of certain policies that you should read, but just familiarize yourself as to where the policies are. And like I've got here, just a brief summary so that you know, if you need something, where to go and where to find it, because you know, they're there to support and to be helpful.
Definitely. And one thing that I did notice when I did my maternity pay as well, I found a policy that was relevant to me, which allowed me to claim a little bit more money during my maternity leave, which, you know, wasn't huge amounts, but it still was something that I wouldn't have got before. And that was actually reading through the policy, which I don't think anyone else had actually read. It was like an old Portsmouth City Council one, that allowed me to take any claimed weeks of holiday that didn't come under my accrued time. So I ended up getting 2 extra weeks pay, but they were like, no one's ever read that before.
And now you've spread the word, haven't you, Laura?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so we'll move on to 1.3 then. So explaining ways to promote equality and value diversity. And as a teacher, you play a key role in this. So equality and diversity is accepting people's differences, but also promoting people's differences as well, but making sure that no one is marginalized while you're doing that. And when we're talking about this, we're talking factors such as age, gender, religion, disability, race, sexual orientation. And it's our job to make sure that we promote the equality. Now, what we have to understand is our students will come from homes where there are certain beliefs held at home. And it's not for us to turn around and say, no, your parents are wrong. It's our job just to say, yeah, that's absolutely fine. But there is another viewpoint here as well. And it's just giving the balance, making sure that the students have all of that information to be able to make their own decisions and reach their own conclusions about things. And so that then shapes what they believe moving forward. And children, when they're younger, always believe, you know, and so they should, as a parent myself, believe what their parents tell them. But as they get older, they'll think, well, actually, and they'll start to question, and then they can go home and question, and you know, and have those conversations. So it's our job to promote and to give it a balanced view of what's going on. So if we go to the next one, please, Laura. So how can we do that? Because that all sounds very simple. We just give give information about each of those characteristics, but actually there's other things that we can do. So it's about challenging negative attitudes as well. You know, so if someone is racist in your classroom, say actually that's not okay, because the moment we don't do anything about it, we're condoning it. So we do need to challenge. And we're talking also about, you know, banter. These, you know, that word that seems to have come into the English language, banter. Well, I was just joking, miss. No, those aren't the things that we joke about. They're the things that upset people. And so sometimes it is difficult to have conversations. The other day, I had to address a group of children, and the one of the children had said to the other one, "Oh, just go home, go back to your own country." And I had to have a big conversation, and actually we opened it out to the class as well, because actually the child that this was directed at was born in Britain. So what are you implying here? So actually, it's ignorance and it needs addressing. And it is uncomfortable, can be uncomfortable, but you need to have the confidence to have those conversations. And the wider you have them with the whole class, for example, as I did in that instance, actually is very beneficial. And children are very good at bringing in their points of view and talking about these things as well. So, don't think it's just going to be solely you challenging those. Other children are very good at bringing in their responses as well. So as well as having the conversations, it's also about recognizing in your lesson plans and activities. As an English manager, I make sure that our curriculum across the school has diverse characters. So it's not the traditional of having the black boy as the baddie in the story. It's now, and then it's not just swapping that around, it's also actually promoting the character's culture and where the story is set. And bringing things in that way. It's about having different religions. It's about having children who are your posters on your walls, not just your classic white child. It's how about we have a mixed race child, or a child in a wheelchair, or other children who are coming from different cultures. It's celebrating all of those diversities, but we do need to be I'll be honest with you, publications haven't quite caught up with this yet, and so we need to actively seek and promote those in our classroom, so that actually when we look around and a child looks around the classroom, they can see a child that is similar to them around their classroom. So and that then means that they're non-racist, non-sexist and non-discriminatory, and we need to be mindful of that. So then promoting our equality and valuing diversity is ensuring that we've adapted and provided support for those students who need extra help. So is it that actually we need to invite EMAS in? EMAS is a service which helps support children who come from other countries and have maybe English as a second or even third language. So it's recognizing that as well, so that the children can access the curriculum. Very often in their native tongue, children, they're very, very clever. It's the barrier is the fact that they can't understand all the resources that are in English. So it's recognizing that so that they can access the curriculum as well. And then incorporating different learning styles into your teaching plans. It's all very, I know I talked about I do, we do, you do. Actually, not all children like, chat with the teacher at the front. Some like hands-on, being really active, kinesthetic, active, auditory learners. Children learn in lots of different ways. You can't just think about, right, well, I want to do it this way. It's looking at the children in your class. Well, how do you learn best? Oh, well, you're a doer. You like to crack on and get on with this. So it's looking at all those different types of learners in your classroom, and making sure then that your activities that you plan are accessible for all. We'll talk a bit in a minute about task adaptation, but we need to make sure that that child makes progress, but also that they are able to learn independently, that they feel that they can succeed by the end of your lesson. Because if time after time you're unable to succeed and you feel like you're failing, what are you going to do in the end? You're going to switch off, and then you're going to become troublesome because you're bored and you're not succeeding, and nobody likes to fail time and time after again, and we need to recognize that as teachers. So as I've said, they're written materials in own language, making sure that they're not racist or sexist or non-discriminatory, making sure that we have the multicultural running through our learning resources, recognizing different cultures, and then fundamentally when we're splitting in our class into groups, we're not, remember back in the day, Laura, you'd have the circles, the triangles, the squares, and let me guess, the bright ones over there, the octagons.
Yeah.
Children know already where they are. They don't need it quite explicitly. And likewise, we're not going to have the girls versus the boys. It's, really mixing up those children. If COVID taught us anything, it's that children learn best from each other. And actually, if they're in those mixed groups where all those differences are appreciated in their groups, they're gonna flourish.
Yeah.
So moving on then. So why is it important to identify and meet the learner's needs? And I think I've spoken already on this, but I'll make it explicit. So when we recognize what a child needs, we then lower the barriers so that then they're able to learn. And each child in a different lesson will have different barriers. And it's just recognizing what those are, when you get to, when you get to know the children a bit better. So as I said before, it might be that they need to work at a completely different level. I've got a child in my class, we're doing fractions this week. I've got majority of the class at year 6 and he's doing year 2 fractions work. But we're all doing fractions. So he feels included in what we're doing. And actually, when I give my input, he's still listening to that. He's not completely shut off in another room with a TA out of the classroom, completely separate, still open to what I'm teaching, but then the task that he does is appropriate to his level. And then that task adaptation, that's not necessarily changing the task completely. It might be that that child has different resources. It might be that it's just a little bit simpler. It might be that you have a word bank with it, but you're adapting the task so that that child can access that particular, that learning. And when we're talking about resources, I'm not necessarily just talking about your bead string or your word mat. It might be an adult support. It might be just me going over, do you know what you're doing? Have you got what we're doing? Lovely. Right, I'll leave you and I'll come back in 5 minutes and I'll check that you're still on the right track. So there's all sorts of different resources, but it's making sure that children can access those. I mean, not every child is going to want to put their hand up and go, oh, do you mind if I get the multi-link out? If you know that that child is probably going to need multi-link, if it's just in arm's reach so they can just reach and get it, nobody else knows, that child might feel completely different about that resource then, and then they'll be able to access, crack on, and as we've said already, motivate, flourish and succeed. And that's what we want our children to do. So we've talked about adult support. Gone are the days where we have adults glued to a child, explaining, doing it for them. No child actually really wants that. They want to be able to work independently. They want to be able to access the task by themselves. But it might be that, as I've put here, personalized feedback, or it might be in that afternoon, you say, oh, I've noticed this morning you struggled a little bit. So how about we just do a few more together as a bit of a personalized intervention. So when we go into maths the next day, they're like, I've nailed this. I've got this cracked. It's just giving them that extra little bit of support. And then there is nothing better than having a classroom where the child can look around and go, oh, yeah, I'm going to use that. I know to need that. Oh, I've got that. Or like I've said, can reach the resources. Don't have wallpaper up. And what I mean by that is a poster that means nothing to the child and has been there for 6 months getting dusty. Things around the room need freshening up. They need to be current. Should be able to walk into a classroom and go, you're doing non-chronological reports, you're doing fractions, and your science topic is this. That should be current and useful for that child. Otherwise, it's not supportive. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I know I do tend to get overexcited and get and talk at speed. So I apologise.
Passionate.
Passionate, that's the word. Right, so we'll move on to section 2 now, where we're moving on a little bit more about the learning environment. And I did start straight away by saying that children need to feel safe. There's a lot of research out there that shows that if children are heightened, then they won't learn because they're anxious. I did have a child in my class a couple of years ago, and it was very jittery child. And actually, when we got to the bottom of it, his house, the ceiling had come in on one particular evening. I know it sounds really, the ceiling had come in, and he'd noticed in my classroom that there was a crack along the ceiling, and he thought that exactly the same thing was going to happen again. So all he could look at was the crack. He wasn't focused on anything else that was going on. So bless my site manager, he came along with a bit of filler and filled it all in. But that's what I mean about children feeling safe. It's not necessarily about being bullied by another child in the school or in the classroom. It's about what has gone on at home in the past that might affect where they're at now. So you really need to be very aware of the children in your classroom and things that have happened to them. And that's why you need to establish a good relationship with your learner. Just take the time in the morning. Oh, hello. What did you get up to last night? Oh, what are we all reading at the moment? Did anyone see such and such on TV last night? Oh, you've got new shoes on today. Where'd you get this? Oh, I love the haircut. Just shows that you're taking an interest in those children. They're not just, a number in your class, which you've got to get through and get progress made. If you children think that you like them, care about them, they'll flourish because they feel safe. Do not underestimate building a relationship with those children. And I'm not talking about being their mate, so you let them get away with whatever they're doing in the classroom. It's still definitely need those boundaries, but it's easier to have them if you've got a better relationship with them. And when you're setting those rules and expectations, which we all do on the first day, right, children? Let's think about what our classroom rules are going to be, right? Let's put them all up on the wall. And then you've got to stick to them. You've got to be really consistent. And it's a myth. Children love boundaries. Children love to know where they stand. So, oh, I know that if I do that, she'll make me do that next. Oh, if I don't do my working, oh yeah, I'll have to do it at playtime. Oh, if my name goes on the board, that means they like to know what happens. If you're being a bit airy-fairy about it, they will push and they will push and they will push and they will push. And the only person that loses out is you, because you have a really, really tough time with that class. So keep to those expectations and be consistent. Now, positive classroom culture, it's okay to make a mistake. You really have to work on that and make sure so the children feel comfortable putting their hands up. You say things like, oh, do you know what? That's a cracking idea. It's not quite what I'm looking forward to at the moment, but hold that idea and we'll come back to that. Oh, no, that's not quite right, but that's okay. Thank you so much for having a go. Just encouraging them. Gone are the days where it's like, what? You said what? Oh, look, we've been talking about this for 10 minutes. What do you mean you don't understand? We don't know. You wouldn't like someone saying that to you, so we're not going to say it to our children. It's just valuing everything they say. And actually, do you know what? There's sometimes when I'm doing my shared writing on the board, and I think, oh my God, that's a rubbish idea. I'd never. You write it down, and that. I was part of the shared write today. That my teacher taught, put my idea down. If it's not your idea, they will love the fact that you have valued their idea and they are part of it. So make sure that it's okay to make mistakes. And in active learners, we want our children to be part of the lessons, part of that experience. It's actually really tricky as a teacher just to have 30 students in front of you and they're all just like. So the more involved they can become, the more ideas. Actually, it's far easier. It's, you get the bounce from the children. Everyone's enthusiastic. It builds a buzz in the classroom. Everyone's excited about what they're doing. So all the time thinking, right, you get those children active in this, whether it's contributing, whether it's doing, whether, whatever it is, partner talk, talking on tables, you get them active in it as well. And then it'll realize, Bobby at the back will realize that you can't have a little snooze when you're talking, because you're going to ask him a question any minute now. So keep them active. And I touched on this before, actually, about creating links with families and wider communities. Those children, parents might have had a bad experience with school, or they want to be really supportive and support their child, but they don't quite know how to do it. So create those things. I'll be honest, I love parents' evening. I love when the parents come along and think, oh yeah, I know now. I got it. Or just, building up that rapport with them, so that when that child might go home and say something to oh, so and so did this at school, you've got the support from the parents as well. So that's really important too. Safety, as I keep saying, not allowing bullying, not allowing negativity is fundamental to making sure that your children feel safe. And there'll be and that the bullying is a whole school as well. So it's not just on you, but it's just recognizing if a child comes to you and says, oh, so and so did this, or so, that they can trust you, that actually you're going to do something about it, that they, they've opened up to you, they've spoken to you about it, and that you have taken them seriously and you're going to do something about it. And that then comes back to building up that good relationship, and it's all about the safety there. And then I've talked about the wallpaper in the classroom. And also we have to think about the different kind of learners in our classrooms. Some things around the room, if it's all too bright for them, might overstimulate them. If we've got autistic and ADHD children in our classroom, we start putting up twinkle posters absolutely everywhere. It's going to send everything into overdrive. If we've got an A4 piece of paper with every little piece of paper absolutely crammed with information, that's overload. And that's not going to be safe and supportive for those children. So really getting to know your children and about how we can make them safe and support their learning. Okay, so next, moving on to 2.2. So why is it important to promote an appropriate behaviour and respect for each other? So having that inclusive learning environment benefits everybody. And here I've just listed some things, just drawing together things that we've talked about already. So having that safe learning environment, encouraging active learning. I've talked about the benefits of that. Building positive relationships. I've spoke about that. I've also talked about the modeling professional conduct, and that is outside of school, in school, how you conduct yourself around the school when you're in the classroom. You know, you might see a child running down the corridor and you think, oh, they're not my class, that's nothing to do with me. Of course it is to do with you. If a child is running down the corridor, it's not safe. They might bump into someone, they might trip over, they might hurt themselves. So all the time, conducting yourself in a professional way. Think about how you speak to children. We don't need to be shouting at children. We need to be speaking to them in a calm and measured way, explaining to them how and why their behavior is appropriate or is inappropriate. So the whole time you're in a school, you have a responsibility for all the children in the school. We've talked about inclusivity and diversity, and we're also about disruptive behaviour, because disruptive behaviour is not appropriate, is not respectful towards others, and it's not to be condoned. So if you don't address it, whether it's in assembly, whether it's in the corridor, whether it's in lesson, whether it's as they're leaving the school, you are condoning it, and it's not okay. Because as we keep saying, it won't make other children feel safe. But it also, if another child sees them doing that, they'll think, oh, well, I'll do that as well. And before you know it, it's all snowballing. Right, okay, so moving on, going on to section 3, which is thinking about other professionals that you might come across when you're in teaching. So I've split this, to make this a bit easier, I've split it into 3 sections, 3 categories. Because as I was thinking about the different professions you'll come across, it's for different aspects in education. Now, the ones that we tend to think would spring to mind, first of all, is those to do with the families and with the children. So you might come across the school nurse. School nurses very often still pop into school. Back in the olden days when I first started teaching, the school nurses would come in and teach children sex education. Not anymore. That's down to us now to do that. But the school nurse comes in, and very often it's so that parents can just pop in and have a chat, whether their child is still bedwetting, whether they're having trouble to sleep at night, whether they've got food intolerances, anxiety, all sorts of things. School nurse will be there and they will speak to the parents. You might have a speech and language specialist. Actually, you're very lucky if you have a speech and language specialist come into your school. But actually, speech and language communication is really high at the moment. The number of children with speech and language issues is really high at the moment, and that's a knock-on effect from COVID, where children weren't able to communicate with one another. And actually, I believe it is a knock-on effect from the fact that children spend so much time on screens now, and they're not interacting with each other. And parents also, there's not so much interaction going on with our children. So that's a massive issue at the moment. Social workers, you might come across social workers if you've got children and families that have social workers attached to the family. So if there's been issues, if they're current issues, if they're on child protection, the social worker may come in. I can't imagine you'll have too much communication with them, because usually it goes through the SENCO, or it might be through the head teacher, but you might be asked to read reports that they've written about certain families, or you might be asked to contribute to meetings in that way. Educational psychologists will come in and they will look at the behaviours of the children in your class, or whether they've got processing issues with their learning. They'll come in and they'll observe, they might have conversations with you, and very knowledgeable. Again, though, educational psychologists are like gold dust. So if you do have one coming into your school, you are very, very lucky, and make sure you ask them all the questions that you need to know about that child, because they will also design a plan and help you and support you. So, for example, you've got a child in your class, you're like, but when we're talking, like, they're able to verbalize everything and they keep putting their hand up in class, but when we come into writing, they don't write anything down. So there might be a processing issue there. And so they'll give you tips and advice on how you can encourage that child to overcome those barriers and work with you and have interventions that they put in place. They really are very knowledgeable. And unfortunately, you may well come into contact with the police if something has happened outside of school, where the child has, or the family has had an incident. Then you may well get a police report that has come through, and that'll go through to the head teacher, but they may make you aware of it, so that you're then able to, well, be aware that the child might have a change in behaviour when they come into your class the next day. So that was one group that I put together. And then the next group that we've got are those that help you in your teaching and the learners in your class. So we have a music hub. They are amazing. So you might have people that come in and support you with teaching of lessons. At my school, we have the ukulele. I don't know how to play ukulele, but fortunately, we have music specialists that come in and they help to support the teaching of that. We have an English hub as well. You might be fortunate enough to have English hub. Oh, I didn't put maths hub on there as well. We have a maths hub as well. They come in, offer training. Our English hub, we have a person come in, it will help us look through the books, look at our curriculum. So very helpful, like I said, with the Maths Hub too. EMAS I mentioned earlier, so they're a group of people who have be able to come in and support children who have English as a second or third language, and they come in and they support them with their learning. They can also translate letters to send home to parents, and look over any communications, and they can also do an assessment of children, because sometimes the barrier is purely the language, but it also might be that they are SEND in their own language as well. So it's not to us to assume that actually it's because they don't speak any English they can't access the curriculum. Actually, if it was in their own language as well, they would struggle too, because they're SEND across in their own language too. So they're very good at doing assessments like that. And don't underestimate the support that your colleagues will get from you. We'll have whole school training. You'll have year leader when you first start. You'll have a mentor, and that there in your school is a wealth of knowledge, and you need to tap into that. And teachers love to share ideas. No one shuts the classroom door and is inward looking. Everyone is very open to sharing ideas. So just ask. And cluster meetings. Cluster meetings are where you have schools are put into clusters, so schools that are in your area, and you go and share ideas and at the cluster meetings as well. And they're nothing to be shy. Don't be shy about those. They are, again, making sure that you ask all those questions and share ideas. I love going to the cluster meetings. I'm like, oh, what book are you doing for that topic? Oh, what are you doing for that? Oh, right, magpie that idea. And so love to share ideas. And our last group that I put in is about the monitoring of learning. So, yeah, the dreaded Ofsted, nothing to be shied away from there. That is part of our education system. Yes, don't really know what else to say about Ofsted. They are there as a monitoring, and we just need to accept that fact. But to support with that, we have peer review. So what that means is that other schools, leaders from other schools, will come into your school and offer they'll think about 2 or 3 things that you're going to have a walk around, have a look at and identify. And again, sharing ideas, swapping ideas. Peer reviews are very supportive, actually. You can get lots of ideas from those. And a bit like with the local authority, LA advisors, they will come in and offer advice and talk you through what you need to do to make sure that your school is succeeding and being the best it can be. And if you are in charge of a subject, very often you can have advisors come in that will help you and support you in your role in that subject. So that's about the monitoring of learning. And then our second to last, our 3.2, about the teaching role and the boundaries between the teaching role and the professional role. And very often all of those professional bodies that I have spoken to you about, we will work very closely with, but there does come a point when actually you give them as much information as they need, and then they take that on and do what they need to do. So, for example, if you've made a MASH referral about a child, and that those organisations and services then take that on, you may not know what the outcome of that referral is. And as teachers, we just have to accept that ultimately that something might have gone on, or there's a resolution or not a resolution, and there's had to be some action taken with that child, and we have to trust those bodies, and we don't know what the outcome is. But as I put on here, it's again making sure that we've got those professional boundaries when we're working with other people, and that you understand what your role is. I'm sure we would all love to, solve the problems and do absolutely everything, but teaching is a really hard job, and we've got enough to do. So making sure that you understand what your part in the big picture is, doing your part and passing that on as and when it needs to be, and making sure that at all times you maintain confidentiality. You cannot be discussing what has gone on with a particular child to all and sundry, maintaining that confidentiality at all times. And we need to make sure that with people that we're talking with, you don't become too personal. Mainly we're talking about students here. you know, I have talked about getting a friendly and balance with them and getting to know that child, but actually not being over friendly so that those boundaries then are blurred when you're asking children to do certain things and act in a certain way. That actually, you know, we have those professional boundaries there, being professional at all times. And that's why I've said that, you know, teaching is a 24/7, 365 day a week, you know, a year job, that actually we have to be professional at all times. And also asking for help. You know, this job can be a lot when you're working with children all day long, every day. You absorb their problems, you absorb what's going on with them, the highlights and the lowlights. So if, you know, you make sure that you do ask for help and reach out if you need to, and make sure that you're not taking on too much. Top tip there, make sure your time management is good. So then we move on to our last point. So describing the points of referral to meet the individual needs of learners. So these are people that you or an organisation that you might need to make a referral to. Now, every school will have a SENCO in their school, and that is the person who is in charge of special educational needs. So if you have a child in your class who is on the SEND register, then your SENCO will be advising you on how you can best support that child. So if you do have children with SEND, then you need to make sure you're talking to the SENCO regularly and making sure that you're getting the best advice. Talked about educational psychologists. You as the teacher might well be the one that goes to the SENCO, who then makes the referral to the educational psychologist, but you are the one that is, you, as I've said, keep saying, you see those children most. And so if you've noticed that actually there is a barrier in their learning, which you've tried adaptive practice and it's just not cutting it, there might be a further problem there that the educational psychologist can do a range of tests or come in and have a look. Speech and language therapists, we spoke as well. If you've noticed, especially in the early years, that children aren't able to form they're struggling with their language, not able to form the sounds when you're doing your phonics teaching, then actually it might well be that you need to get a specialist in to support that. Likewise with an occupational therapist, if you notice a child who has physical needs, they may well need to come in and support with that to be able to do certain exercises. That's usually in collaboration with home as well, and it might have been something that the child has already parents have recognised, and so it's just then the support continues in school as well. And then moving on, so CAMS, so for children who've got mental health concerns, or you worry about things that are going on with their emotional difficulties, it may well be that through the SENCO we refer that child through to CAMS so that they get the assessment and therapies and things that they need. CAMS is totally oversubscribed, but that should never put you off if you feel that a child is causing you a concern when it comes to mental and emotional needs, because we should definitely be putting it in those referrals. And then we've got other specialist support if you feel that you've got a child who you feel may have be on the autistic spectrum, or you feel they've got sensory supports or any behavioural differences that you think need addressing and you need support with, then again there's outside agencies that come in and support you. And and also with parents and families, a parent might come to you and parents even just say, I just don't know what to do with my child anymore. They're causing me concern. They won't listen to me. They won't do this. They won't do that. And actually, parents should never feel on their own. And this is what I'm talking about, us all working together. We can offer them help as well. And there's certain programs that parents can follow and be signed up to so that then they get the support that they need as well. So schools are a holistic approach, and we are part of the puzzle, but we can put all the children and the parents in touch with different organisations that can support, so that then everybody is able to move forward. So I believe then that's, Laura, can you just show? Yes. So that's giving you the background now and the knowledge that you need, and also pointing you in the right direction so that you have the knowledge that you need to be able to undertake these tasks. So I will talk through the tasks with you. So the first one is referring to section 1. So it's just creating a bubble map of the key responsibilities of a teacher from the UK government. And that, hint, hint, wink, wink, is where you need to be looking at the teacher standards that we went through and picking out those key responsibilities. There are a lot on there, but I want you to have a look through and think which of those really are the key ones that would make sure that the children feel safe, that they're making progress, and that you as the teacher are carrying out your fundamental duties. So have a look at those and have a look what the key responsibilities are. The second one is you having a look at and explaining why safeguarding is important in schools. And this is, you really do need to read through that legislation of keeping children safe in schools. And for 300 words, I want you to just pick out those main points that are in that document, and any other wider reading that you do that then you can reference in that summary, so that you're explaining why safeguarding is important in schools. And make sure that that's what you're focusing on, why safeguarding is important in schools. Yes, safeguarding is important in all walks of life. I'm a welfare officer for my son's swimming club, and I need to understand safeguarding about that. But this is key. What is it about why is it important in schools? And then your next task is drawing together what we've just talked about the professionals that you will come across in schools and as a teacher. So draw a network map of linked professionals to schools and teachers who support meeting the needs of children for a holistic approach to education. So that's your first thing, that network. How does that all fit together? All those bodies that I've just talked about, and with the school at the centre, how does that all fit together? And then what I would like you to do is explain how all of these services work collaboratively to meet the needs of the whole child. Secondly, explain the boundaries between these professionals for each of the three, of each of the themes. And when I'm talking about themes, I'm talking about the families and social services being one, support learning being the second one, and monitoring learning being the third theme. And then describe the resulting impact of the child on their families, or their families, of working with each of these sectors. And that's a meaty one. That's a 1,500, please. So really looking at how those professionals that we've just talked about there have an impact on the learner and the families in the school. So what I plan to do next is that will be a 2-week deadline for that, please. But what I will do is I will put out in the next couple of days a live half an hour meet next week. So if you've got any questions about anything that I've discussed tonight, or you want to talk through anything about the task, then you can touch base with me next week. But in the meantime, if you want to contact me by email or anything, and contact me that way, then that's absolutely fine as well. Laura, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add about the assessment form. So obviously you can get the assessment form on the assignment. So the assignment's been set on Teams. Just double check it, because I've just edited a version. I'm going to re-upload the edited version because that was my mistake. I uploaded the wrong version.
We're looking for update 2.
Uptake V2.
Yeah.
And there's just a little bit extra we've popped on there to sort of guide you in your research.
Yeah, but everything you need for each of those tasks has been identified and talked through in this session this evening. Right, well, good luck. Have fun with that. I hope we've inspired you and you're excited about your upcoming assessment. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.